Have you ever wondered why wars happen? Nations have always fought each other for authority since the beginning of time. In recent centuries, competition has expanded to more intellectual pursuits, including space exploration. It's almost like they believe that whichever nation can construct the largest and most potent rocket ever will win the race. A contender nobody saw coming is China, and with its new 800-meter rocket, it just might take the lead. The Starship, a spacecraft still under development, receives the honor of the largest rocket ever built. The SpaceX-built and tested spacecraft has an assembled height of 120 meters and a 9-meter diameter. The Starship can generate enough thrust to launch around 150 tons of payload into orbit all at once, thanks to a combination of more than 30 rocket engines. With that accomplishment from the USA, you might be shocked to discover that the Germans formally created the first rocket to enter space in 1944, the Kármán line, which the Federation Aeronautics International designates as the beginning of space, was crossed by the V-2 rocket. The Cold War began as a nuclear weapons race between countries with more advanced ballistic missiles that morphed into a race in space at the end of World War II as control of the V-2 production passed to the US, the Soviet Union, now Russia, and the UK during the following several decades. To attain and master spaceflight first, the US and the USSR produced numerous novel and unique rockets. The US, however, gained the upper hand and started making several unique rockets. Then, as a result of the USSR's eventual dissolution in 1991, Russia, Ukraine, and eventually both Europe, employing the European Space Agency, and Japan to speed up their own rocket research and development, took over the manufacture of the Soviet rockets. But other nations like Iran, India, and China have recently started taking part in the space race. China's history with space travel. Although China began studying rocketry before the launch of Sputnik, it wasn't until 1970 that the nation sent its first satellite into orbit. Since then, China has launched over 400 missions utilizing rockets from the Chang'e or Long March families. The Long March 1 was the first rocket in the family of Long March rockets. It is a 3-stage rocket that is 98 feet or 30 meters long. On April 24, 1970, China successfully launched its first Jiuquan in the Gobi Desert, where it also placed its first satellite, Dongfang Hanwhan, into orbit. It became China the first nation to launch a satellite, and that day is now celebrated every year as China's Space Day. The Long March 2C, which is 40 feet or 12 meters taller than its predecessor, is another structure in China. Since its first flight in 1982, the rocket has been launched more than 50 times. Another Chinese rocket with a payload capacity of up to 7,700 pounds is the Long March 2E, which has 4 side boosters and 3 stages. In geostationary transfer orbit, China's 3 substantial, around 48,500-pound space station modules will be put into orbit by the Long March 5B from a specially constructed spaceport on the island of Hainan. The Chinese equivalent of NASA's Space Launch System, the Long March 7 2-stage rocket, which launched the Tianzhou cargo ship weighing 29,800 pounds on March 9th, will aid in the construction of the joint China-Russia International Lunar Research Station. It can carry cargo up to 330,000 pounds. The fact that March 11 is a solid propellant rocket sets it apart from the others. It is simpler and less expensive since it employs solid fuels rather than separate tanks for propellant and oxidizer. This rocket may be launched at sea and is 68 feet tall. China's future plans. China has made progress in its space program, but it still has lofty goals. Its upcoming rocket will demonstrate that it is willing to compete with spacefaring countries like the US. In fact, Beijing has made space exploration a key priority. China is currently prohibited from using the International Space Station, so it is building its own space station that is expected to remain in orbit for at least 10 years in order to compete. 3 astronauts have already been dispatched to the station. However, the upcoming Chinese rocket eclipses anything China has accomplished in orbit to date. It is a massive rocket that towers over it at 800 meters. The fact that China is constructing a rocket this size is actually not shocking. The nation is home to a large number of mega projects, including the longest bullet train, the boldest road projects, and skyscrapers constructed in a matter of days. This endeavor may sound like science fiction to many people. Even the thought of creating and deploying a structure almost a kilometer long in orbit may sound absurd. Mason Peck, a former NASA chief technologist, cautioned against mistaking China's actions for humor. According to Peck, who is currently a professor of aerospace engineering at Cornell University, the concept isn't wholly absurd, and the dilemma is more of an engineering than a basic scientific one. The International Space Station, one of the most famous human inventions, is only 109 meters long and was built via international cooperation. In actuality, it brings together the US and its longtime adversary, Russia. The ISS cost somewhere around $150 billion. Imagine the price of China's 800-meter spacecraft. For the ISS, it took 30 missions spread over a decade to put all the modules together. This long-term strategy for China will provide the nation's program with a feeling of direction for many years to come. It would be a grave error for many Western observers to dismiss this idea as propaganda. In 2009, China released a study, the Roadmap 2050, that stated its plans to overtake the United States as the world's premier spacefaring nation by the year 2050. As a result, we see China steadily carry out its space agenda. Can China complete this project? The answer to this lies in the most recent successes the nation has had in space. It is the third nation, after the United States and Russia, to have brought lunar rock samples back to Earth for analysis, an achievement that the US could only claim. It also has successfully landed its own rover on Mars. China also accomplished the first lunar far-side landing ever. As was already established, China is now constructing the Tiangong space station, which is already occupied and competes with the ISS despite being older. All of this suggests a nation that is very committed to its space ambitions. When analyzing China's ambitions, it becomes clear that creating a spacecraft of this size has many benefits. For instance, a structure of this size would enable China to develop artificial gravity, which would aid astronauts in avoiding the harmful effects of weightlessness, such as the loss of bone density and muscle mass. Due to its size and massive structure, the spaceship can spin at the proper speed to produce centrifugal force, which can be used to simulate the effects of gravity. However, you cannot just rotate a structure housing people because the average person will begin to experience motion sickness at speeds more than a few rotations per minute. However, as demonstrated by tests, at rotation rates of 1 or 2 rotations per minute, these effects almost vanish. The question here is, how big would China's new spacecraft need to be to simulate Earth's gravity? China launching the spacecraft into orbit. The nation's space team can use several missions to launch a variety of components into space, as was done with ISS, and then assemble them there. China can use yet another cutting-edge strategy, though. A large structure that can fold or collapse to fit into the nose cone of a single massive rocket, such as the spaceship, might soon be conceivable thanks to a novel material. The building then enlarges once it has been launched into space. This concept's secret lies in a field of study known as mechanical metamaterials. These fold down to a small portion of their deployed sites using joints that function similarly to scissor joints. The Hobman sphere is the most well-known illustration of such a mechanical metamaterial. In its resting form, this child's toy resembles a small spiky ball, yet it can enlarge into a large spherical ball with a diameter many times greater. This new spacecraft may sound like something out of a movie, but haven't all new space efforts looked like that? Let us know what you think in the comment section below.